everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, we're starting. Okay, so Rochelle?
Hi, hello. Tonight we're going to have Division Chief Christensen and Judge Judy Anderson are going to do the red light camera presentation, and then Judge James Anderson is going to give you a presentation on statistics, I think, and then I'm going to give a presentation on court fees.
Will you pull the mic closer to you? And also introduce yourself and give us your title, please.
My name is Rochelle Work, and right now I'm the acting court administrator. My real job is the deputy city clerk. So Bill Christensen and Debbie.
I might add, she's doing a fantastic job, counsel. So, thank you. Since our city clerk does not have a microphone, I will say that on her behalf. So while the handouts are going around, the council has asked for many months several questions around the red light data and what it shows and what it means and what it implies. And so we have at least taken a cursory look at those questions. We have not involved our third-party administrator who handles it to do any real in-depth analysis, but the numbers are not significant in terms of accidents within the intersections, and Deputy Chief Christensen will discuss that. So we did not, all the work that you see in-house was done by the folks who are going to be presenting here tonight, and so if we have missed some of the data that you're interested in knowing about, or there's additional detail that you want to know at the end of this, certainly provide us with that direction, and then we can go and make that determination. But I think you will find this illuminating and very informative. So with that,
okay.
Let's go.
Just for the record, I'm Division Chief Bill Christensen, and I'll just go through. I just passed around this memo here, and I'm just going to go through here, hit some of the highlights on it, and then if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So one thing that we noticed this year when Public Works put out the accident statistics, that there was a pretty drastic increase in accidents in the city. So combined with that, we thought we needed to look at not only the red light intersections, but see what was really going on there. So I physically pulled all the accidents for the last 3 years, and I looked at the first 3 intersections that we installed with the red light cameras, because we have a history of them. They've been operating for over 2 years now, so we have pretty good data there. So that's the data that we used. And I looked at a couple things we looked at to see what's the traffic counts at those intersections. We looked at, and then we looked at the number of accidents, actual accidents in the intersection, and then we looked at the number of violations and looked for trends and stuff that are happening there. So if you look, the first thing on the report is that lists the traffic counts. Public Works actually does the traffic counts at those intersections. Charlie and Tim told me they do them every other October, and they do them during midweek when there's no bad weather is what they try to do. So they did those counts. So I actually listed the counts from 2009 to 2011, which are the most recent counts for those 3 intersections with the different approaches. You'll see they really stayed pretty stagnant. There wasn't a lot of change. It was kind of surprising. I thought there would be a difference. There's not. The one thing that kind of stuck out, eastbound Mineral at Santa Fe actually went down about 3,000 between 2009 and 2011. And that's not what we expected to see, but that was a surprise. So. Next thing we looked at.
Just before, are these for a day?
They do them midweek, and I think they took the average between. I think they run them for 2 days, and then they take the average of the days. I think that was, yeah. In essence. On the accident review, so again, we looked at those 3 intersections. And the difference between what Public Works has published as far as the top 10 accident locations in the city and the numbers here, you'll see these are lower. So when I went through each accident manually, we determined which accident was actually part of the intersection or involved in the intersection. The software that Public Works uses, they enter all the data points from the accident report, but that software actually captures everything that's close to the intersection. And so that makes a big difference. So the numbers you see on there aren't the same numbers you'll see here. These are the actual accidents that happened in the intersection. And we looked at was 2009, 10, and 11. 2009, for the most part, there were no red light cameras installed. Broadway and Littleton Boulevard were installed in October of that year. The other ones came on in early 2010. So we used that as kind of the base point. And I actually broke down the accidents, and you'll see in the chart, first Littleton Boulevard and Broadway. The difference to remember here, these are all the accidents at the intersections. On different intersections, we only monitor certain approaches. Broadway and Littleton Boulevard, as an example, we have monitored 2 different approaches, but this counts the accidents from all 4 directions. So there's a difference there. And you'll notice there, just looking quickly, the thing that I think highlight is the broadside accidents. Those have been really reduced, or we just haven't seen any for a couple of years. Those are typically the most injury-prone, those where people get hurt. And the national studies will say the same thing, that the broadside accidents, red light cameras do reduce broadside accidents. So they do that. You'll notice in some cases they went up, these intersections went up in 2011. The accidents went up all over the city in 2011. And then I also read every report to see if drivers made comments to the officers that the officers noted in the reports about what may have caused the accident. I didn't find a lot. There were none in there that people actually said that I stopped because the light flashed and somebody else was stopping in front of me. I didn't find anything like that. But it was, most of it's, I think I'm pretty confident in saying most all those rear-end accidents are all caused by inattentive driving. And that seems to stick out. And I think that's a trend that probably holds true everywhere, not just here in Littleton. Santa Fe and Mineral, which was interesting, actually Santa Fe and Mineral, which we think we had more serious accidents there. The rear-end accidents have remained the same number there for 3 years, which I thought was interesting, both before the red lights and since the red lights. The broadside accidents again went down, which was good, and overall accidents at Santa Fe and Mineral between 2009 and 2011 went down. So that's a positive thing. Again, the broadside accidents are the ones we're most concerned with. Rear-end accidents happen a lot. That's most of our accidents or intersections are all rear-end accidents. And I think that's inattentive driving. People are following too close and can't stop. Santa Fe and Bowles, again, we went from in 2009, the broadside, I like to look at those, went from 10 in 2009, went to 3, went to 2 in 2010, and there were 3 in 2011. So those are those accidents where people get hurt, and it's usually caused by somebody ran the red light and they hit somebody broadside in the intersection. Side swipes, there are not a lot of those. Most of those are in the double turn lanes where both cars are turning and one of them drifts over and side swipes the other car. Looking through the accidents, so the next thing we wanted to look at was if the accidents are they increasing because of the red light cameras, or is there any examples there? So I tried to pick at intersections close to these same intersections that don't have red lights and see what the difference in the accidents there, and I noted that in here. So Santa Fe and Prince, which is close to the one cameras over here, and there was a 92% increase at that intersection without red light cameras. Santa Fe and Prince is now the #1 accident location in the city. Broadway and Orchard, which is close up there, a block away from the other ones, is a 100% increase. And Santa Fe and Aspen Grove has a 50% increase. So in most cases, the accidents, even at the intersections near those with the red cameras, was more, the increases were more at those intersections than they were with the intersections with the red lights in them. The things that I did note in some of the officers' reports, and I listed just a few of them in here, and this is where I think a lot of it's caused by the inattentive driving, is there were statements like, my purse fell off the seat, I reached for it and looked up, didn't have time to stop. Officers are pretty good about noting these things, because when they go to court, it's nice to note too. There's ones that I dropped my cell phone. One I really liked was I was filing my fingernail, and my peripheral vision took off, so I took off, and I drove into the car in front of me. So that's all that inattentive driving. Somebody dropped their water bottle. They looked at their GPS when they looked back. They didn't have time to stop. I looked at through the 3 years, over 200 accident reports. I only found 2 notations where somebody had made some comment to the officer that the vehicle stopped in front of them quickly because of a light. And they never really said it was because of the red light cameras, but they did make that statement. So I think a lot of times in the public, there's people out there that want to say red light cameras cause more accidents, and I think our study would say that's not necessarily true, and I think the national studies would say the same thing, that that's not true. In some cases, there may be a slight increase in rear-end accidents, but usually those are less serious and nobody gets hurt in them because those are people are slowing down and they just rear-end each other, as opposed to the broadside accidents where people are hurt. So we kind of looked at accidents, and then we went into the violation review. And in some ways, I think this may be a better way to measure the effectiveness of these cameras than accidents or anything else. Because we know in law enforcement, everything from an enforcement point in traffic laws, we want to encourage voluntary compliance with the traffic laws, and that's really the goal. We also know in law enforcement that once we do increased enforcement in an area, if we leave over time, that problem will come right back to the same area. And because it's a learned thing, when people either know the police are working radar in that area or working that stop sign, people drive better. So I think that the cameras do have a very strong effect. That flash in there, I actually think it affects all four approaches to an intersection. In many cases, we only monitor 2 of them, but I think it does have an effect on all 4 of them. So then we looked at the violations over the 24-month period that they were operating. And just for comparison purposes, I compared the average of the first 2 months and then the average at 24 months. So I took the average of the months just to see. So I was trying to compare apples to apples. The first chart in there, the mailed violations, I took all of the violations for the whole intersection. So those one intersection, Santa Fe and Mineral, we actually do all 3 approaches. The rest of the intersections, we just do 2. But I added them together and then compared from 2000 when they started to 24 months into it. You'll see Broadway and Littleton Boulevard, there was a 53% drop in the number of violations at that intersection. Santa Fe and Mineral, there were 46%. And Santa Fe and Bowles, there was like a 14%. That was the low one of the bunch. After that, then I actually put charts in here that actually, month by month, shows the number of mailed violations. And I want to be clear that we use the mailed violations because those are the ones that are confirmed by the company and by an officer that was a violation. That does not necessarily equate to everybody that ends up paying a ticket for various reasons and everything else. But we had to have a standard number so that we could try and compare apples to apples as we went along. So I put those charts in there, and you'll see as you go through them, in many cases it's pretty dramatic. Eastbound Littleton Boulevard, started off like 200 violations, now to where the average is probably right around 50. And there's times it's been much lower than that. You can see on the chart they do fluctuate. Part of that's weather. It could be special events at the high school, something going on at Aspen Grove, things like that. Northbound Broadway and Littleton Boulevard, again, it's about a 50% if you just look at the average, where it went from about 450 violations a month down to where now it's probably averaging around 200 to 225 each month in there. Northbound Santa Fe and Mineral, again, we went from 300 to we're probably averaging now between 100 and 150. Those are pretty dramatic. What those tell me is that people are actually learning. When I talk to people, I still monitor all the calls. People that call the police department about a red light violation, they're all referred to me, and I personally call those people back. And generally, people will tell me, even if they're not happy they got a ticket, well, those intersections are safer. They're more civil, that people, and you can tell it from if you drive those intersections, you don't see 6 or 7 cars continue to turn in front of you. People are actually stopping when the light changes. And so I think that's a positive. I hear far more positive comments than I ever hear negative comments. And I don't even average that many. I bet on a weekly average I probably have, I bet I get 4 calls a week. And the majority of the phone calls that I do get are they either lost their violation or something else happened to it. Somebody dumped milk all over it and they couldn't read it. And they want to know how they can just take care of it. I really don't field many calls that are, really upset with the systems. There are some people, but there's not a lot of them. You see, just going on through these, Santa Fe and Mineral, again, a pretty drastic decrease and on an average basis. Eastbound Mineral and Santa Fe, those are all interesting at Santa Fe and Mineral because they're pretty good decreases, and that's the one intersection that shows a pretty good decrease in accidents. Eastbound Bowles and Santa Fe is one that's actually gone up, which is kind of interesting because that intersection also is the one that has an increase in accidents. There's also an increase in violations at that intersection, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then northbound Santa Fe and Bowles, and again, that's a pretty drastic decrease in the number. So I think it is this voluntary compliance. I do believe that people learn where those are and those flashes go off. That does have an effect on all of our driving. I guess to kind of conclude, everything that we find, I just don't find any information that suggests that the red light cameras cause more accidents. In fact, when you look at the nearby intersections, the increase is less there than it has been in other ones. I really think, and only time will tell, but I think that 2011 was kind of an anomaly. I'm not sure why accidents went up all over the city. I've had a lot of conversations with the traffic people as well as Charlie and Tim, and to be honest, we haven't come up with a real good reason. The most logical reason we can come up with is just the explosion of cell phones and people texting and being inattentive and driving. I have to tell you, I had a discussion with Tim Weaver one day, and he said he does this, which was interesting because I do the same thing. He catches himself at an intersection when he's out there working, watching cars and then counting mentally in his head how many people are on the cell phone when they go through the intersection. I said, I do that too. And he says, yeah, mine always figures out it's between a third and a half of the people that go through the intersection in front of me are on a cell phone. And I think that's probably the number one reason why you see that accidents go up and rear-end accidents have gone up, because I think that's it. Interesting enough, there was a news article 2 weeks ago, I think City of Aurora was on top of Pena Boulevard Bridge on I-70 with some enhancement to their radar, and they were going to actually clock the distance between vehicles and start enforcing people for following too close. And there was an article on that because they have the same issue where they have a lot of rear-end accidents. And it's because people are following too close and they're not able to stop when somebody stops. Traffic stops in front of them and there's a lot of traffic. I don't know if that's a good approach. I suspect that would be hard to prosecute. But that was something Aurora was talking about doing. Judge, the prosecutors may know better than I do. Yeah. I think the bottom line is I think the red light cameras are very effective and they're very prudent to use in the intersections. They're actually save money for the violators. It's a less on the fine than what it would be if the officer goes to court, and there's no points assessed, so nothing's reported there. A couple things we're going to try and do this year because we are concerned about the increase in the accidents. So we're trying to maintain, where traffic unit has started, we're going to manually keep track of these intersections as the accidents come in, and they're going to keep a spreadsheet so we can manually, while it's fresh in everybody's mind, try and figure out the cause of these accidents. So as opposed to go back over all the accident reports for 3 years, try and do it real time, and in the future we may have some better data from you because we can talk to the officers at the time and say, you know, what do you think happened here? Because some people will be happy to tell you they hit the car because of a problem. Some people won't say anything because somebody's told them don't say anything, you know, just take your ticket. So we're going to try and do that real time. We think we can get better data by evaluating that stuff real time. And then we're working on some staffing things, so we're going to make sure that we staff up the traffic unit. This year we've been robbing people out of the traffic unit to help with the shortages in patrol. We're going to try and keep that up and try and direct traffic unit to look at some of these high accident locations and see if we can't come up with a plan and have some effect on, see what happens. I have to think that 2011 is just an anomaly because over the past few years accidents have actually trended down. And then to see this 1 year. So I know that's kind of quick. George?
The only other thing that I think that was significant that we discussed was that there was an increase in drug and alcohol-related accidents.
I'm sorry, Judge, can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm sorry. I'm Julie Anderson. I'm one of the judges for the municipal court. There was an increase in drug and alcohol-related accidents, and I believe the majority of them were down in that Santa Fe and Mineral intersection. It's also hard to say when you look at 2011 if there aren't other factors that are to be considered from a standpoint that that intersection of Santa Fe and Mineral has changed pretty dramatically with respect to the new apartment complex. Some new the ingress going to 7-Eleven being there, it's really changed the makeup of that intersection. And I was very surprised to see, despite that, we're getting a decrease and we're getting a change in behavior in that intersection. So it's hard. It's really hard to try to pare this down as much as you can to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. But I agree with the chief that there are just some factors, sociological factors we don't have control of, and we're seeing changes in the use of our intersections as well. But despite that, we're still seeing a change of behavior. So I would support that the red light cameras are working effectively.
Julie, while you sit on the bench, sometimes folks will contest these. How does that go?
You know, a lot of them are resolved before we see them. The city attorney has an opportunity to speak to them beforehand, and she'd be best to speak with respect to a lot of those. A lot of the ones that we see will be ones where the driver is not the registered owner, some sort of challenge with respect to that. But ultimately, when they come to court, they'll have the opportunity to see the video of their vehicle, and they'll realize, I did go through that light. There's so many things that you have to look at when you are navigating an intersection, and then they replay that in their mind. Then they come and they actually see the video, and the majority of them at that point simply enter a plea.
I tell you, the video is very compelling. If you ever had the chance to look at them, I've had a number of people that they just don't get it. They look at the paper, and it's hard to see, so I get them to sign on the computer, and they can actually watch a video of themselves. And if I walk through, I'll do it on my computer while I'm talking to them, and pointing things out to them, and then they usually like, wow, I did do that. You know, and it's pretty, for anybody that's ever sat and watched them, by the time you look through them, it's pretty compelling. And, you know, the ones that are passed through, by the time they're reviewed by the vendor, and then the final review is by one of the police officers. So anything that's passed through is a good violation, you know, because there's all those safeties in there to make sure that they're not sent out. And we do have the ones where they're misidentified. You know, I'm surprised at how many people will call and say, well, I sold my car and I left the license plate on it. You know, so it wasn't, you know, it's, well, there's a system on there. You can fill out a form and tell us who you sold the car to, and then they'll dismiss it and reissue it. So most people are pretty satisfied with that, actually. And I think I run some quick numbers. Tricia may need more, but I think on the hearing side, you know, there may be down to, I looked in the last month from 3 to 7 a week, maybe. They're actually on the schedule, and I don't know how many of those get resolved before. So compared to the amount of the violations, there's just not a lot of people going to hearing.
And that's versus seeing quite a few, in excess of a dozen, maybe a year ago, on the docket.
Bruce?
Chief, can you, for the people that are at home watching this, and when they learn that this was discussed, they may also look at this on the web. The two questions that seem to come to me the most are, first of all, because of some of the neighboring jurisdictions and how they have chosen to issue summonses versus our procedures, could you discuss again in sequence how it is that we determine that a violation has occurred and that mail goes out? And then secondly, they talk a lot about the light flashing, and it flashed, and what did that mean, and why did it flash, and what happens next?
That's a good point. Let me address the flashing light first, because I do get those calls, and usually it's the same day. Somebody called, it flashed at me this morning. And there's a couple things can happen. First, they're computer-based. Every once in a while, the computers reboot. When they do, they do flash. Generally, what I say to people, it may not have been flashing at you. You know, and then the light comes on like, oh yeah, maybe it wasn't flashing at me, it was at somebody else. But there's sometimes,
I was pretty sure it was flashing at me.
you know, I'm the same way. When it flashes, I'm like, that must have been me, you know. And those are the calls that I get a lot of people, because those lights, they are bright, they do flash, and they take a pretty good picture. If you've ever looked at those, a good quality picture. So I do get those calls that the flash either scared me or they think they're guilty. And when I explain it to them, and then I explain that even if it was flashing at you, how the review process goes through before it's ever mailed out to anybody. So, because there's a certain percentage that when they look at them, that there's either a misread license plate, we see that sometimes, or it's just not a good violation. We're very careful, the officers. There was quite a bit of controversy with Denver was anybody that crossed over the white line. Even if they stopped, they were enforcing that. We never enforce anything like that. Anything that's close, we just don't even process them. We only process the ones that are very clear. And if you watch them, you know, it's very clear. They're way behind the intersection, behind the stop bar. Charlie and his crew, we went out and made sure that any intersection we have this, not only is there a crosswalk, but they paint a white bar at each one of those to make it clear for everybody. Although the law actually says the curb line, but we follow the crosswalk and the white lines. We make it very clear for everybody that goes through there. But I think it's very important for everybody to realize that the review process that it actually goes through before it's ever mailed out. You know, and that happens over a couple weeks. And the company actually has quite a staff of people that do this all day long. And then once they say they're okay, they're electronically, they show up in a queue that we look at here. And every day, right now, we're using an officer that's on light duty. modified duty, and he looks at them every day one by one, and he looks at the video, and he looks at the still pictures, and makes sure it's a clear violation, and then he checks it, it's okay, and at that point, then the company gets the notice, and they mail out all the notices.
Peggy?
Yeah, so if you refine this a bit, I would suggest that you do bar chart rather than a line graph so that we could compare month to month, because I was just drawing a few lines here and there, and I think that gives us a clearer picture. And then, do we have an idea how many people actually have violated the law by going through, but they don't get a ticket because they're not the owner of the car driving? Do we have any way to, either at the company or when they get here?
I don't. I'm not sure how.
That would be a statistic that the courts keep or could keep reasonably easily, and I don't know when they're handled prior to us.
Well, those would come, the clerk would have them if they actually got to court.
Exactly.
But when the company reads these and then the police here read them, they might find out, like you said, the one that got to court who said, oh, I sold the car, that wasn't me.
Yeah.
But if the car is registered, for example, to a male and a female's driving, we know that's not the owner, right?
It's not an exact science, but there is a set of business rules that we established with the company when we signed the contract, and they have a pretty extensive list that we go through that tells their people in Littleton, if this happens, how do they handle it? And one, it talks about if it's registration, because they get the registration, if it's registered to two people and the picture appears to be a female, they mail it to the female. But obviously sometimes that doesn't always work, and the pictures, so those aren't right. So I do get some of those calls. But we had set out the rules with the company that tells them what to do on different situations like that. Like a good example, this afternoon I had contact with them because we had the issue down on Santa Fe. So the officers were directing traffic at Santa Fe and Mineral, and there was a lot of violations. We were directing people through there. So there's a business rule. If a police officer is in the intersection directing traffic, we never even see those. When their people there and their staff are working on them, they know that those are just pushed aside.
Those officers that are directing need to make sure they show the camera.
Well, and actually the reason they called me this afternoon was that they had got notified from dispatch that we were closing the intersection, so they know during this time frame that every violation that comes through the automated system is just rejected, and so there won't be anything from that 2-hour period or whatever it was.
Then one more question. Do you have any thoughts about whether or not people are avoiding certain intersections? So, for example, they're avoiding Santa Fe and Main Bowls, and therefore are going up Prince, and maybe causing more accidents there, or down at Aspen Grove, avoiding that intersection and going another way.
I don't. Maybe Charlie could, through some of his traffic counts, determine that, but I don't know for sure how you would come up with that.
Well, I think if the policeman has to go to an accident, maybe it'll be a question to ask at some of these where the accidents are increasing, but they're not red light cameras. They might say, well, is this the normal way you drive, or would you really have preferred to go the other way? How they say it might elicit some of that information.
We could also look at any increase of traffic counts in some of the adjacent intersections that the chief looked at as well with respect to accidents. Because there has been a dramatic increase in, what's funny to me, when you look at the Littleton and Broadway intersection, that's been arguably our most successful intersection with red light, with a gross decrease in infractions, a gross decrease in accidents. Yet right down the way at Orchard and Littleton, we're seeing a very large increase in accidents.
Yeah, and that's what I'm just wondering. For example, northbound people who want to turn left onto Littleton Boulevard may be cutting through at Orchard, to get around that.
We'll check on that.
If I can, I think one of the things Charlie and I are working with the state on is the timing along Santa Fe, and I would venture to say people are probably more frustrated with, take northbound Santa Fe from Church through Bowles. You might get people running around it trying to beat traffic, not because they're trying to avoid a light, and they're looking at the timing all the way from C-470 north through into Inglewood. And so I think if Public Works were here, they would say it's not about red light avoidance, it's about traffic avoidance, congestion avoidance. And so that's an ongoing conversation and not one, as we all know, there's just too many people on the road. And the timing of intersections on the side street versus the main thoroughfare trade-off, how long do you want to make the people on the side street wait versus the main thoroughfare wait? And so I would venture to say, Peggy, that's what drives people off Santa Fe, not.
And I think that does happen at
lights.
Aspen Grove. We have that issue with, people that southbound in the evenings will cut through Aspen Grove in the back way. But I don't think it's to avoid the red lights cameras. I think it's to avoid the backup of traffic.
I know one person in this room will do almost anything to not go through one of those intersections. And that's me. I just don't want to go through them. I tend to not want to rush through lights, so I'm pretty careful not to be trying to push the limit. But having been rear-ended twice in my life, not my fault, have a little aversion to be rear-ended again. So.
Bruce?
Maybe it's worth one more question on, the comment is made that the amount of time offered for the amber light has been in some way changed to allow more violations to be recorded and to occur. Those people that don't trust the system ask that question and state that. I'm comfortable just with my background in talking to the traffic engineers that that's not the case here, but I think it's worth discussing that. And particularly it's the differentiation between how long an orange light will be there for straight through traffic versus how long it might be there for left turn, which is where we're doing the summonses. And I know that question comes up.
That's true.
If you want to discuss
Yeah, and I've had that discussion. I'm not a traffic engineer, but those are set by a standard. None of them were ever changed in Littleton. There's always that out there that the yellow timing was changed to cause more violations. That has not happened. What Charlie and Tim and the traffic engineers would tell me is those are set by a standard by the National Highway Traffic Safety, that they will the speed of their lane, and then they're determining how long the yellow cycle should be before it turns to red. And ours are all in compliance, and they've been the same all along. But that is out there. People do say that was happened. The other thing that they always explain, that just what the manager was talking about, all the lights on Santa Fe worked with Dr. Cog, so the traffic flow in and out of the city are all timed together. And Charlie did tell me the other day that they were going to increase the time allotted for some of that area up and down Santa Fe. So that will be changing to try and address some of that backed up traffic on Santa Fe.
Julie, I know you've had occasion to work with the red lights, both with Denver and Aurora, and there are other municipalities that do use the red lights. I think Lone Tree is using them now, Aurora, of course, Denver, Cherry Hills, Greenwood Village. Two questions. One is, are all red light cameras the same? And then number two, based on your experience with at least the 3 municipalities, do all municipalities handle them the same, or do we have to handle them the same? Can we add our own way of, of managing the lights? Some can be tougher, some can be less.
Right.
Is there some objectivity?
For the most part, the equipment is the same. The mechanics in the equipment is the same. You might call it something different, but the reality of it is it's got a clock, it's got a camera, it's got a video recorder, it has a hard drive to be able to communicate, it's got the induction loops and the in the road. So the mechanics of the equipment across the municipalities is the same. You do have the ability to dictate how you are going to use it, which part of the intersection you're going to enforce, what speed a vehicle could be prior to the enforcement beginning. So for one municipality, they would ask, it was programmed to where it wouldn't pick up a vehicle unless it was going at least 11 miles per hour through that intersection. And that was designed to avoid the people that stopped right over that stop line, were rolling to a stop as opposed to the people who were clearly violating the red light. The delay that you would use after the light turns red, you can dictate that. So there are a lot of different factors that, for different reasons, the municipalities are going to modify. And that's going to be based on what the needs of that intersection are and what the use is. For example, a business district versus residential, for example.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions on red light?
No, but I'll comment in response. So the lack of consistency in the way jurisdictions are doing this is one reason that some people are upset, because one chap told me he'd drive, I can't remember how far, but he described a route that he would take to avoid going through any intersection in any municipality he could to get from Littleton to someplace east, because they had different triggering.
Right.
And seemed, a reasonable kind of man. This was not, some psychotic person or whatever, but it really was troubling to him because he wanted to drive correctly. He just didn't want to get triggered. So it is something I think would be good to have some regional dialogue on.
It does contribute to the confusion and the mistrust of these types of systems. But I can understand where they would put a mileage limit to the speed of the vehicle if they're getting a gross amount of tickets that they have to dismiss because the person's stopping, but beyond those induction loops and perhaps a little bit into the intersection, and that wasn't a decision that they would choose to enforce those types of tickets. So they modify it a little bit. Or that delay in the red light would give more drivers the benefit of the doubt. I agree with you, though. When there's the opportunity to make it as consistent as possible for our citizens, that would be ideal. Sometimes it's just not possible.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate the information and presentation. Michelle?
Judge James Anderson is going to talk now about some statistical questions that he has.
This issue I'm going to talk about is one I know is near and dear to the heart of Councilmember Sunanek. It's the inventory number that we've been trying to pin down for so many months. And I think that a little bit of background. When we originally talked about the inventory, part of the problem that we had was the report that I generated and would give to you before was our general month-to-date, year-to-date picture of a month at a time of current cases. And unless you take that picture on the same day every year, like January 1, 2012, 2011, 2010, that would give you an idea of kind of what's open. Our system, we could do that knowing that we're going to do it now, but we couldn't go back to the 2011 date, 2010 date, 2009, because there's no way of knowing if there were cases that were opened in an earlier year that were closed in that year, then you can't tell if it's apples or oranges. So in working with the city clerk, we looked at it a different way. So, well, let's see what we can find that really looks at this inventory. So what we did is we went back to look at year by year the number of cases that were opened by year compared to the number of cases that were closed that had been opened in that year. And that will give us an idea of year to year what's the inventory left over of those cases. Now, when we talk about open cases, there can be different reasons for the cases to be open. So, for instance, in a general offense violation like a theft or a trespass, they could be pending taking a class. Like sometimes the prosecution's offer is that they need to take for a juvenile, maybe a discovery class, or if it's a theft thing, what we call the anti-theft class or shoplifting class. And it takes a while for them to get that done, so the cases can't close the first time that they come in. Any case that has a review date on it, a lot of times the offer are contingent upon there being no violations of the law, local, state, or federal, for a period of a year from the date of the plea. So those automatically are going to stay open for that full year. It could be that there's a warrant, a failure to appear warrant, or an outstanding judgment warrant. There could be payment of restitution or unpaid fines, something like that that goes on. In a traffic matter, it could be unpaid fines, collections. Again, it could be review of, for instance, a defensive driving class. It could be an outstanding judgment warrant that's with DMV to keep that case open to get them to come in, particularly with younger offenders, because that will get their attention if nothing else will, is that license. And in parking, for the most part, it's collections as well. So we went back to look at these, and for 2012, current year, obviously we only have a little over 3 months worth of numbers to work from, and most of those cases are going to be open because they actually have not come into court yet, and that's going to be different from any other year where they've already come into court, been processed, unless it's an outstanding warrant, a failure to appear warrant at the very first stages. So those numbers, although I looked at them, I don't think that they're helpful in terms of the inventory because they're kind of our current cases. If we go back to 2011, so everything filed in the year 2011 vis-a-vis how those cases were resolved or are they still open, we show there are 13% of those cases that are open at this time. And that would be a combination of the general offense, your typical criminal offense, your traffic, and your parking. If we go back 1 year earlier than that, 2010, we drop it down to 5% that's open. Same numbers, same criteria. If we go back another year to 2009, 4%. If we go back to 2008, we're at 2%. Now, prior to 2008, and I think with the city prosecutor, we went through a bunch of old cases, outstanding warrants, and I think she probably dismissed about 95% of them. It seems to me it was something like that. I went through some outstanding judgment warrants, and I probably dismissed at least that many. This was just earlier this year. These are some older cases that would predate 2008. So I'm pretty confident I could say that anything that's prior to 2008, we're talking a fraction of a percent that would be open. Those would probably primarily be serious cases that had not been into court, so warrant affidavits where someone has perpetrated a crime and absconded, we don't know where they are. The city walks through a warrant and they have evaded capture or at least extradition for at least 5 years. They could be cases where there's restitution due. Those are the type of cases, because we've got a victim that's out money, that we try to keep open for the benefit of those victims. So those ones are going to be fairly insignificant, small numbers, but there will be a few. If we look at the gross numbers, since we're talking apples to apples for the most part between 2008 and 2011, it would appear that prior to this year, we're probably at about 6%. That would be our number. And Councilmember Cernatic, am I hitting the target here this time?
Well,
Am I getting closer to the target?
yes.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's almost, but I guess I have a pretty simple view of there's a number. And I realize you're capturing it in kind of percentage of the cases that are there. But there's really an inventory that's not just a percentage, but it is a number. Because it'll speak to kind of the capacity for the throughput of the court, right, to deal with the issues and how long they're going to be sitting on the table somewhere. I'm not sure you've answered the question yet, or the approach, the view answers the question, is our backlog based on numbers of cases growing, shrinking? I mean, we see some of the volume come through on violations and what's brought into the court. And I realize there's some character differences in how long it takes the court to deal with some of the cases. You know, some are a little more assembly line approach than others requiring maybe a little bit more conversation. But it's also the background, paper, electronic flow, whatever it may be, to pull those through. So, and I understand that the older it is, the less there should be out there, because we should have it resolved. But I guess I was just kind of looking for this kind of simple number. You know, we have 5,700 backlog at this point in time. You know, somewhere in there.
If I may, and Judge, maybe this, and I'm going to try to restate your question, because I guess I would ask you, Judge, if I may, Mayor, sorry. The word backlog is what just raised a flag for me, because what you just described was not a backlog of cases. When I think of the word backlog, it's dealing with the court can't handle the cases that come through. What I think the intent of what staff put together was not the backlog, but was to explain why those open cases are there. They've all been processed through the court system. They are still open for a legal and appropriate reason, and they have gone through between the prosecuting attorney's office and the judge's role to close out those that needed to be closed out, and those others are just open. And so to the judge, to the councilman's question, is there a feeling that you have related to the ability for the court system to handle the number of cases that are coming through, a.k.a. is there a backlog?
The answer to that is there's not a backlog, not at all. Now, and I think when you look at the concept of a judicial backlog, it's different in the federal government and state government and where we are in municipalities for this reason. Speedy trial, the time that you're allowed to resolve a case on the federal system is not defined. It's a reasonable thing, but it could be a year or more. In the state, it's said it's 6 months from the date that person comes into court the first time, is arraigned, until it has to be resolved. In municipal courts, it's 90 days. And so it's a very short time period that we get to these cases. We don't say, well, okay, we'll put it on, and I heard this when I worked in the state system, that you get in some jurisdictions and you were on a trailing docket and you might be ready for trial and you came in on a date and you're number 4 in line and the first trial goes and they just reset you. And you have to come back and you have to come back. And we don't have that type of an issue at all. We do not have a backlog of that at all. When we have cases, they come through, they're seen. If they're the general offense cases and it's not an arrest, most of those cases are getting resolved when they come through that first time. On some of those cases, they may not get resolved that very day because the person wants to consider the offer, talk to an attorney. There might be something they needed to do in terms of maybe they want to pay restitution to try to show the prosecutor that they're deserving of a good deal on the case. In a traffic matter, it may be that they want to contact DMV to see what their points are like, because the records that come through aren't always accurate, and they want to make sure because it makes a difference for them. They might want to talk to an attorney, and so they may come back. But I would say the number of cases that comes back more than one time on a percentage basis is 1% maybe or less. They get resolved pretty quickly. When we set matters for trial, we're setting them and getting them resolved 30 to 45 days out in almost every case. There are a couple of them where we might have a continuance, and I can think of one case where it was continued a couple times because a witness refused to come up, then the witness was subpoenaed, refused to show up. It got pushed all the way to the 90 days and eventually resolved at the very last minute. And those aren't things that there's any more. I mean, the city prosecutor did everything they were supposed to do in getting this person under subpoena. This witness simply didn't show up. And interestingly, I saw her on, what was that, Wednesday? Monday, yesterday. And one of the things that I talked to her about, and she understood, she's not, yes, I understand, I know I need to be in court, I know that it's important, there's somebody else out there, and I was a witness, and she said all the right things, but she still didn't show up when she'd been subpoenaed. And those are kind of things that are outside the control of the city attorney and the courts. But we don't have a backlog like the federal government has and the state government has.
And I may have used the term backlog inappropriately. Because I understand what you're saying. However, I remember when you first came to the bench, one of the things was we had cases sitting around somewhere, and in your comments you said, we've cleaned up that. And what I was looking for is the inventory to kind of say, hey, we had a bunch of stuff that was open, and we've appropriately dealt with it, so it's not sitting out there possibly languishing. It has a resolution. It's active. It's on our radar screen appropriately now, as opposed to it might not have, it might have been just somewhere in a drawer, for lack of a better term.
I think I've looked at every drawer.
Right.
I've gone through every stack.
Well, and my request for some of this was to be in a position to say it took, that didn't happen overnight, and it was was a situation where it took some time to kind of squeeze those out, to not use it, to use a non-technical term, squeeze those out so that now we know. And, your percentages are good, because if 2009 comes back and it's still 4%, or the number is still the same, a year from now, the question is, well, did we not pay attention to that? Because there probably is a baseline number somewhere and it's not zero, but it should have gotten smaller.
And that's exactly what's happened. I mean, one of the things that I did is I went through every case we had that was open, other than ones that were simply at collections for collections of money, because that's not something, we're done with those in essence, but they remain on our numbers as open simply because we're trying to collect those figures. But pretty much everything else went through with outstanding warrants, with outstanding judgment warrants, with bond issues, with class issues, with all those type of things are closing. And I think the most significant number that I saw of all this stuff is to look back to 2011, only 1 year ago, and we have 87% closed. And that includes, or I guess if you look at that 13%, that includes any case that was open prior to April 24th of 2011 that had that 1 year for no further violations, because all those are still open, waiting for maybe just that one thing to make sure that at the end of that year they hadn't have any further violations. And that is probably the most common dispositional requirement of everything that I see, is no further violations of the law for a period of a year.
And I'll take the commentary as sufficient. What I was looking to do is, if there was a way to have captured some of that inventory in a numerical term, to kind of say what was the result of the squeezing, that we may have had X amount or X percent that we've squeezed out of the inventory, and we're now current.
So what you're asking, Councilmember Cernanek, is you want to know how many they closed from the time Judge Jim Anderson started until right now. You want to know how many he closed, how many he's taken care of, how many have gone through the prosecutor. You want to know a number of how many he's closed. Is that what you're asking?
Well, it was in the sense of a total, so that it has some context to it, yes.
A total number of cases that he's taken care of and closed since he started. I'm just trying to get the number that you're looking for.
Well, this is one I will give up on some of it, because I thought it was a pretty simple concept to say, somewhere in the system we had a gazillion files, and we have now a gazillion less some, because we have stuff coming in, and we resolve it, and so it gets shipped out. Okay, so we're always going to have some, but we're at a gazillion less something, so our inventory of what is should be in our consciousness at some level of point in time is less. That's what I was looking for, and I will.
Okay, can I just add one more thing? That when something closes, say something closed today, and it was a 2009 case, it closes out of 2009 and takes a number off of 2009. So that percentage is going down.
I understand the percentages of what is there that is aged has gone down, but we have stuff coming. If you take it from a manufacturing perspective, we have raw material that comes in, and we have resolved cases that go out. Okay, and if you have raw material being cases that are coming in and cases that are resolved, and if you aren't handling some of that flow, you're going to have the stuff is going to be collecting in your plant, okay, your manufacturing facility, okay, and the question is, at various points in time, do we have stuff that we've collected in the facility? Have we somehow constipated our manufacturing line, okay, or are we doing okay? And that was all I was really looking for, is how to get a little bit of a pulse on that, and just look for a simple number. And I will give up and deal with just the commentary, at this point in time, because it sounds like people are having a hard time understanding the concept.
Now, maybe you've got me confused, but I don't think so. Why couldn't we have the number at a given year, let's say 2009, how many were not closed in 2009? And then how many at this point have we drawn down the 2009 inventory, so to speak? And we have so many that started in 2010, and we're looking back at this point, how many have we drawn down out of the 2010? So we could track by year, then we could also do a total of how many for those several years are still open. Is that, I mean, is that, can you do that kind of thing? And maybe, Phil, that wouldn't take care of what you're asking, but it seems to me that it would capture that.
I thought that was what we had
Yeah.
kind of asked for.
I think I heard Phil, and I think we can work with the staff to come up with a number, and I won't belabor the issue this evening.
And I would just add, it's a little bit, this is getting a little off topic from yours, but there was a concern, as you all will remember, that we had a lot of outstanding warrants that were backlogged, using the term loosely. What we do know is that to the extent we could find every file that was in that courthouse between Tricia, the city prosecutor, and the judge, it's been reviewed, and it's a really quick process of just getting the judge to enter an order of dismissal. So we're fairly confident, we can't be 100%, but we're fairly confident that all of those files have been reviewed and those warrants have been dismissed.
And the judge and I just had this discussion, I think it was maybe Friday, about that we're going to put this on as a, if you call it like a tickle file, where it's not, they're going to be reviewed on a schedule. We're going to be going through files and reviewing to make sure that that doesn't ever happen again. So.
And from the prosecutor's point of view, I'm Tricia McCarthy, I'm your city prosecutor. Historically, when I started in January of 2010, cases weren't reviewed on that frequent of a basis. And when we had the warrant issue regarding the library book cases, we went through and started to review all those. I think that's the process that Judge Anderson is talking about. We reviewed, I believe, close to 5,000 cases at that time and purged a lot of them. Since then, I believe we've implemented some good policies that continue to need to be tweaked to make sure that cases are reviewed on a yearly basis. So since I've started, those cases have been reviewed on a yearly basis. So there's not that backlog that there may have been prior to 2010. In addition, a lot of the cases that remain open, it's typically an issue of an uncooperative defendant. The clerk's office will send out many letters, many warnings as to what is going on with their case, whether it's a request for proof of class or community service, and that is done on a regular basis. So typically, the cases that do remain open and the stats that the judge had referred to, it's people that typically do not want to be found or do not want to come into court. And so sometimes it's difficult to encourage that.
Jim, and then Bruce, and then if there's no one else on it, we should move on. Jim?
I'm just going to make the comment that I'm not really interested in staff having to do make work in order to get all these statistics for us. I think that if we've got a problem with the statistics they're providing, I'm not interested in having more work being done by the staff.
Bruce, and then Bruce. Okay, you're first. Okay.
I guess just to change the tone a little bit, my concern is that we're not treating people like numbers, and that we're not doing mass operation there of trying to get people through as quickly as we can. I'm more concerned with that each defendant feels like they've been treated fairly, that any victim feels like that appropriate concern's been given to their case, and that due process is followed, the 90-day rule or whatever, and that appropriate prosecutions are made, and that charges aren't stacked inappropriately, and those kinds of things. And because those, to me, are the quality of our justice system. Based on those types of judgments, how do you feel we're doing?
Well, I've had the opportunity to work in the state system, and I saw those type of things happen in the state system. I saw people that it was a cattle call. I saw people that didn't agree with the resolution of the cases, that felt that they were disenfranchised. I saw cases where charges were stacked. We don't have the DUIs, but I can remember cases that had DUI per se, DWAI, careless driving, no operator's license on person, and defective taillight. And I'm thinking, why did you charge that person with all those offenses? When you stopped them maybe for defective taillight and they were under the influence, it seems like that's what should have been the case. I am extremely proud of the quality of the justice that's being meted out in our court. There were some things that had to be changed, and I think Ms. McCarthy started them when she came in terms of procedures that just hadn't been brought up to kind of where we are. We got through that. This inventory issue where there was a backlog and old warrants, we got through that. There's sometimes where I'll ask somebody that comes through, and every Thursday I deal with the people that come through on the payment plans and things like that, and I'll ask them at the end, do you think you were treated fairly? And I can only remember one person that didn't answer yes to that. And there's some people you just can't please, but if you take the time to listen to somebody, you take the time to try to make that case individual, I think that the quality of your justice is pretty good.
And just to follow on that, a tremendous circumstance we have in here for our community is the ability to take kids who have run afoul of the law, committed something that's on the books as far as a crime, to bring them into the municipal court. How do you feel that is going along those same lines?
On the most part, pretty good. There are some kids that, because of the sanctions that we have in a municipal court as compared to the state court system, if you get into a delinquency court for maybe the same type of offense, a theft, for instance, in the state system, in the district court, you can do a lot of things. You can put someone in a placement. You can commit them to youth corrections if they're really incorrigible. You can provide social service intervention, program intervention, those type of things. You can have a probation officer, or you can have a pretrial services officer that can be assigned to those. We don't really have those type of resources in the municipal system. And so the police a lot of times will start a kid in the municipal system because we can deal with them and try to get them started. And sometimes they get to a point to where our system is inadequate. And it could be because of a family situation. It could be because of a health situation, something like that, or an addiction that we simply can't. I mean, I can't put somebody in a residential treatment facility in municipal court. They can do that in district court. And so to deal with some of those issues, they need to be in that type of a system. But a lot of the kids that we see, we're able to deal with, and they don't come back. There are a certain number that do, and probably the repeat ones are the ones that we get to know and realize that maybe our system is inadequate to deal with that particular kid. But I think most of the ones that we see, and I know we're going to see a lot of them, for instance, tomorrow, because there are events that will happen that will bring in a lot of kids. And I think that we'll probably deal with most of those kids, and I'm just anticipating, but I know what we've done in the past well, and be able to say that those kids will not come back.
Bruce?
I'm going to actually pass. I think we've sort of covered the range of the comments, so I think it's good.
Okay. Judge? Do you have anything else?
Not unless there's any other questions. Thank you.
Rochelle? Thank you.
I'm going to do a little bit of a, presentation on some of the court fees. At this time, the municipal code sets the fee for court costs and deferred judgments, and that was done in 1988 and has never been changed since then. Sets court costs at $15 and deferred judgments at $25. The other fee that we want to look at is instituting a probation fee. As you know, we got a part-time probation officer in February of 2011. Most of her cases are adult, most of them domestic violence cases. She's starting to handle a few juvenile cases, and we're thinking that that's probably going to increase. In the past, we used community corrections for anybody that was placed on probation, and that was like an outside agency that people went to, and they had to pay them a fee. And so we're kind of looking at, should we be charging a fee for these people to be on probation it's usually for a year, most of the time. And if we do, what should we charge? So I did a survey I tried to include all of the 22 benchmark cities that we use, but of course, I had 3 that didn't respond. So, but I did prepare that, and the average fee, or the probation fees are all over the place. I mean, you have like a flat fee that goes from one to some people that charge a monthly fee, and it just kind of varies depending on, I think it might have to do with how involved their probation department is in their jurisdiction. And then another couple of fees, the court costs on there's the average court costs, for the jurisdictions, and then the deferred judgment fees. And as I said, those two are, right now, they're in the code. So what we would kind of like to have it done is have the code changed in a way to say something more that the fees are set by the judge on an annual basis when he does the fine schedule. That's the way the remainder of the fees are set, the traffic fines, the warrant fees, any other court fees we have. The judge sets those each year, and they rarely change. The court costs, we would like to see if we can have that raised to $25 is kind of what the average seems to be when you look at all the different jurisdictions. And as far as a deferred judgment fee, we would like to leave that alone for the juveniles, because clearly we want the child in those cases to be responsible for what they have to do. But we do quite a few deferred judgments on adults too. And we would like to raise the adult deferred judgment fee up to $50 and leave the juvenile one at $25. And then for probation, we want to do a monthly fee, but assess it as a flat fee so that they're not, making a monthly payment like they would if they were going to another jurisdiction or to another company to do that. It's easier if we just get it, away at the beginning and just set a fee at like $10 a month, so we would just assess $120 in probation fees. So it would require, the two would require a change to the code, obviously, because we'd have to amend that part of the code to say what the fees would be. And then the other one could possibly just be done by the judge as part of the fine schedules.
That's what I was going to say. Some of this, we're recommending that it be done by resolution, and we take it out of the code so that the judge can just look at what other courts are doing.
And I think we've told the council we're going to be bringing general offense updates to you, so we could potentially do it at that time as well.
Yeah, May 1st, we have the general offenses on for consent, yes?
And then there's a couple of other things that we are going to be researching. We're going to research paperless tickets and then possibly taking online payments for traffic tickets. So we're going to research the logistics of that and then bring that back to council when it's prepared.
I have a question. Is there any occasion at all, regardless of the reason, that we have any fee charged to a victim?
For a failure to appear maybe on a subpoena if they got cited into court is the only thing I can think of. If they got, a witness cite.
I can't think of anything now.
Okay. Any other questions? Peggy?
Yeah, so in terms of charging the fee up front, if that's, if you're bringing something to us, and I've attended court quite a few times and seen some of the folks that come in there that can barely, even pay for transportation to get to court. And then I've also heard, the court say, well, work out a payment schedule. So I'm not sure why we wouldn't just assess by month. If they could pay, I guess then you could decide. If they can't pay now, then you work out the payment schedule. Otherwise, you leverage it up front. But theoretically, people get to court because they've done something wrong. But still, if they really just can't, they don't have the money. I don't want us to be putting a burden on them that might encourage them to go steal money.
The court clerks, sorry, Judge, go ahead.
I can tell you that when people come in, I'm surprised at the number of people that come into court, even on something like a regular traffic ticket, a speeding or red light, who don't bring in the amount of money that they kind of know they're going to have, because some of these tickets are written so that they can do them by mail, and so they've got the idea of what the cost is right there. And generally, unless there's some extenuating circumstance, they get any kind of reduction on points, since we base the fine on the points. They're paying less than that amount there, even with the court costs added in, and yet still people will come in. And it's almost typical to say the less the fine, the more difficult it is to pay it, which seems counterintuitive, but I can just tell you experientially that's what I see. Sometimes the people will come in and I'll say, my goodness, you've got a $500 fine. They go, okay, I'll pay that. And then I'll get someone that's got a $15 court cost on a dismissal, and they'll say, can I have 4 months to pay that off? Now, the concept in fines and fees is we don't have paupers jail, so you're not going to get jailed for your inability to pay. If it comes down to a payment issue, and the court's considering a contempt sentence, for instance, a contempt proceeding, that if they have the inability to pay, they're not going to go to jail. And so I probably have more people that come to me and say, I'd rather go to jail on an infraction. I had one guy that came in and said, I'm all ready to go. I can't pay that. I just don't have it. Just put me in jail. And I said, sir, I can't put you in jail on an infraction. It doesn't work that way. Well, what's going to happen if I don't pay? I said, well, if you don't pay, it'll go to DMV and there'll be a judgment on your license, and then they'll try to get them to be able to pay that off. That's all that really happens in those type of cases. Now, for instance, in Centennial, where I also work, they don't have anything that's like a traffic offense. Everything's an infraction, and so there's no jail at all. It's all collections type work, and ultimately that's what you end up doing. You make a decision on whether or not you want to refer it to collections to try to get them to find some voluntary resolution of it, or decide up front whether or not it's appropriate to suspend the fine on good behavior, not breaking the law. We'll do a payment plan. I'll authorize it for almost anybody that asks for it, to give them some time. They don't cost much, and they're allowed to spread it out. But on some of these ones, and I can think of one gal right off the top who has about $6,000 worth and comes in and makes a $5 payment a month. And the math will tell you that's not going to get collected anytime soon. So there are a few of those cases where you simply don't have the ability to collect it. We're pretty good compared to the other jurisdictions I'm in, because I know, for instance, in another jurisdiction I'm in, if you don't come in and make that payment, a warrant goes out, it goes up $130, it gets very expensive very quickly, and we don't have that at all. So we're pretty good at allowing people to do that, and if I look at somebody and they really are destitute, a lot of times I'm not entering the type of fine that you're talking about where somebody would need a payment plan on. That's case by case.
Okay. And so then, based on my original question about the upfront or monthly, is it possible to charge more if they pay by month rather than upfront? As in, they get a discount if they pay it all at once?
Well, I mean, when they do a payment plan, they do pay a $25 fee, but it's a one-time fee. So if they owe $100, they'll pay $125, and they'll spread it off over how many months. And I've told some people, if you can get it together, within, I think we give them 30 days before we charge the $25, then you don't have to pay that. And that, if it goes from 100 to 125, that's a 25% increase. That sometimes gives them the motivation to do that.
Okay.
But they can get up to 30 days before that fee goes into effect.
Any other questions? Do we want to bring these fees back in, raise them,
If you guys are comfortable, bring them.
to a meeting? Everybody okay with that?
There'll be a process of moving it to resolution.
Some of it we would repeal the ordinance and then make it via resolution of the, and then the other would be an amendment to the ordinance. Come before you for 2 readings.
Bruce?
I absolutely understand the procedural side of the whole thing in terms of allowing the judge to set annually, which seems like that makes a lot of sense because it's flexible. Maybe I didn't hear it, though, but the logic, you talked about wanting to change some of the fees, and it's just basically in relationship to more or less, quote-unquote, what the market is bearing?
Kind of, yeah. It's just, that was what I did was, and like I said, I used the benchmark cities because that's what we use, and I found that we were pretty much under everybody with the exception of one other place. And most of the places you can see on like probation and stuff, and it's a lot bigger than what we're asking for. You go to community corrections, and I think it's $20 a month that you pay to go through an agency that does your monitoring for probation, so.
In theory, it's a cost recovery issue, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the ultimate conclusion you could theoretically draw is that we're not recovering enough of our costs based on the fines we're levying. It's not about...
It's certainly not a money-making
Just administrative work of staff.
Like our probation officer, we collect nothing for probation.
Right.
But we're paying her a salary and her time and supplies and all of that. That's just basically a recovery of our administrative services.
And that's something I would take into consideration in setting those if you went in that direction. I think one of the things we passed, or you all passed about a year ago, was the drug destruction surcharge. And that was something that the police looked at. What was the cost it actually did? Ran it over the cases and said, that's going to be reflective of the cost. It's not a money-making thing. This would be the same type of thing. We'd look at, how many cases is she running? And I think the numbers showed about 200. What is her salary, and be able to collect that. We're not trying to make this a business. And a similar type of thing with the other fees, particularly the court costs. We are very low with our court costs, and I don't think, and we try to assign those in cases because they generate an expense to the clerk's office, and we'd like to be able to get that compensated realistically by the fees that are collected in case.
Anything else? Okay.
Thank you.
Are you done? Thank you.
Thank you for
That
taking
was
the
great.
time.
Thank you. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. to kind of review a bit, and also, get my notes here if you don't mind. Particularly, I think this evening we were going to discuss the think tank, and we were talking about the members of the think tank and the goals and objectives and what did we expect to have come out of this and all of that. I've had some additional conversations, and in particular, my District 4 meeting on Saturday was asked by a number of citizens a number of questions about this. There seemed to be a substantial amount of, I guess we'd call it misunderstanding, or perhaps there's levels of miscommunication, perhaps there's the wrong information that started going. But the perceptions kind of seems to be that it's a recruiting versus economic gardening plan, and I can say unequivocally that has, in my opinion, that has nothing, that is not anywhere near what I envision our economic development, or whatever we call it, and perhaps the name economic development is not correct. Our economic future, our economic visioning, our economic forecasting, not forecasting is not wrong, but that is not about recruitment, and it's not about incentives, it's not about any of that. It's about learning what we don't know about. Back to the think tank, I apologize if in my original explanation of what I was thinking on the think tank, if it was unclear. I'd like an opportunity to try to clarify what the intention was there. And based on that clarity, I welcome discussion and input, but I would also caution council that if this starts to get too layered up and too piled on, and we start to try to manipulate or manage or control this too much, then I think that it's probably an idea that we should put either on the back burner or kill permanently, because that is in fact what I think is exactly what we don't want, and that would be an outcome that would not serve us well. So back to on the think tank, perhaps even that was incorrectly named. It was just a name I pulled out of my hat. A think tank, I know that there's another connotation for that, but I just thought it was kind of an interesting term. We hadn't used it yet. We used task force and ad hocs and this type of stuff. So it was just in some ways another name to throw at it. But it is intended to be a super simple process for us. It is not intended to be a 3-hour or 2-hour meeting tonight and then another one to discuss again and another one to discuss again. This is our third meeting on this. And I don't that's not the intent here. I mean, we have a lot of other work that needs to be done on this, and not to continue to debate the particulars of this particular item. So I'm referring back, as I tried to get some clarity on exactly what I wanted to, how I felt I could best try to get some of this boiled down to the simplest form. I went back to my original document. I hope you all have it. If you don't, I have a few copies. Does anybody need a copy? Oops. Does anybody else need a copy?
Come on.
Okay. And I go back to the quote where discussion of think tanks has a tendency to get bogged down in the vexed question of defining what we mean by think tank, an exercise that often degenerates into futile semantics. It is better to describe what the organization should do, then the shape of the organization should follow to allow this to happen. To me, this is more an organic think tank than it is a designed think tank. I believe that if we design it, then we have predetermined the outcome, hence rendering, in my opinion, the outcome useless. I recommend no more than 11 members, and I would actually lean further down that too, in the neighborhood of 7. I think that with the right people, the fewer the people, the better the outcome could be. The membership, again, putting the right people on it is important, but I don't know that we're the right people to decide those right people. I think we are the right people to decide the business and industries that we want. We want a developer. We want a land use professional. We want a banker who does small business loans. We want a banker who does commercial loans. I think we can decide those broad categories, but I don't believe we should pick those people. And as I said before, I don't even think we need to know who is on it. We don't need to have any influence or have them feel as though they have any obligation to any of us. This needs to be done on a very free basis. I think that part of that selection includes then will create the opportunity for the group to be very politically neutral. On Saturday, I was asked, would I put anybody who was on the BAC committee on this? I said no. And that is not because I don't respect anybody who served on the BAC committee, or not because I don't think that they provide valuable input and that their opinions and input into the issues is of the highest quality, but that's not what this is. This is not a BAC. This is not a CAC. This is a group of professionals who come from a world that we don't live in, who do things that affect us. And so the think tank bridges that learning gap that we currently have. This is people who can say, I can build it anywhere, I can lend money anywhere, I can buy it and sell it anywhere. It's not people who say, have a lot of baggage on Littleton, because this is not about getting them to tell us specifically what do they think Littleton should do. What should Littleton put on Marathon? That's not their decision. That's not even, quite honestly, always our decision. That's private property that goes for sale, and people come in and they go through our process and things happen that way. This is about people looking at what happens out there in the world of lending and the world of development and says, these are the types of things that we look for in municipalities. This is the type of environment that we look for when we're considering a shopping center, or this is the type of infrastructure that works best for manufacturing. So when we are shopping for a client and looking for a location, these are the things we look for, and this is why. I don't know any of that. And they know that, and they can, and bringing that knowledge and bringing that basis to us, but making it specific to Littleton without dictating or making us feel as though we are obligated to do what they say. I think we have to keep it broad enough so that they understand that we're asking for their expertise to give us guidance, as opposed to tell us what we need to do in order to get this type of business in this location. I went back to the goals and objectives, and while I am totally open to tweaking and refining, I wanted to go through those because I wanted you guys to get, from my perspective, an understanding of the broad base that I was trying to create with the goals and objectives, while still giving enough direction that I felt that the group would be able to execute and provide a end product for us. The first goal is to provide an overview of economic development strategies that are viable and feasible for Littleton. That doesn't ask them to tell us what to do. It's provide an overview of economic development strategies that are viable and feasible for Littleton. So it brings it back home. I mean, don't tell me what I brought up Glendale. No. What Glendale did, Glendale did. What Littleton does, Littleton does. It doesn't mean that we don't have to do the same thing. In fact, we do the same thing, we won't get the same results. But we do need to keep it somewhat customized. Number 2, provide an economic outlook for Littleton that considers available land, current zoning codes, current business base and mix, current residential mix, proposed changes, rezoning, code amendments, incentives for business development and expansion. Just simply asking for an economic outlook for Littleton that considers these elements, which are the basis for a community. It's the commercial, it's the retail, it's the residential. That's what all of the economy of Littleton, when I think of economic development, I don't just think of building retail shops. I think economic development is everything. It's viability, it's vitality, it's good neighborhoods, it's strong schools, it's a good infrastructure, it's a functioning city government. All of that lends to the economic development. If you have flat tire on any of those levels, you are a limping city. And by having all of those running at a high level, you have a viable city with multiple economic development balls in the air. Number 3, provide suggestions for innovative and collaborative economic development opportunities. I mean, it's clear direction, but it's also not it's asking for ideas. So it's saying, tell us what we need to do. It's because I don't think that's what we want this group to do. But provide suggestions for innovative and collaborative economic development opportunities. They know those things. They're out there doing them. They're watching other people do them. I don't know what those are. And honestly, they don't have to be incentives. It doesn't have to have anything to do with tax breaks. It doesn't have to have anything to do with urban renewal or any of those things. I don't know what it has to do with, and that's why I feel as though allowing this group to be more elastic, to have the flexibility to bring in what they know to what we don't know is going to provide a greater result for us, a better result. If we tell them what to do, what to tell us, then they will. And then we will be obligated to follow through on that. So why do we have to get super specific? Doesn't the open-endedness allow for more creative thought and then hence a better end product? And I guess that's where my head has been on the think tank, is that kind of a little simpler, a little more broad-based with the flexibility, but defining what we can define and should define, kind of relate it to a bowling alley. We're not going to, we kind of can create the gutters, but the lane, use the lane. So if there's any misunderstandings or anything that I haven't made clear or that you don't, you can, disagreeing with me is fine. I don't mind that. I don't mind if you guys don't like this, you want to do something else or whatever. I just don't want there to be something that's misconstrued from my intent here, because I'd rather lose this argument based on not wanting to do this than not understanding what I'm trying. And I don't even know if I made myself even more clear or less clear this evening, but open it up for discussion. No discussion? Great. Oh, Phil, did you have your hand up?
Thanks, Deb. I don't think I came away with a different understanding, Deb. So, I mean, I appreciate your sharing that tonight. Where I come from, I guess the only part that I might say is when you say we don't live there, I think some of us live, at least may have one foot in some of this space where we've gone through site development or site selection and have those kinds of experiences where we've looked at locating a business, or some of that has come in some of our professional backgrounds. So I would say we're not, I wouldn't say that we're outside some of those issues and an understanding of that. And, I would say, some of us have probably had enough discussions with businesses on why they've located where they have located, and have some understanding of some of that. And where I'm struggling with is, I believe if we develop some common understanding and language so that we can have a constructive discussion, that's going to be a good thing. And the, what we might look for from 7 folks, as I'm understanding where you're coming from, trying to get any kind of group to a consensus, as opposed to what might be better is for us to actually hear from folks and then be in a position to synthesize. Because I hear what you're saying, which is you want it open, but they're also going to be in the bowling alley and assigned a particular lane, which means Littleton. And you want it to be viable and feasible in some context for Littleton. Well, that's, that ends up being a lot of work that we need to also appreciate, as opposed to having it being delivered to us. And I just think part of the effort is having gone through multiple strategic planning exercises with many different sized businesses, it's something that the group that's going to have to live with it usually has to be fairly involved. There may be some elements for staff or research to be brought forward, but it's going to be the process that folks go through that's going to allow for that, the better decision making, or will permit better decision making in trying to actually figure out, okay, now what do we do with this, which is going to be ours. Yes, they didn't necessarily tell us that, but if we're absent some of that common language to talk about it, I'm not sure we're making that much progress. We can go out and we can read books and look at case studies and kind of come up with that, but what might be a better approach is for us to hear some things and debate, what did we hear? What's the language that we picked up? What are some of the things that were key? Do we see any of this, as opposed to assigning to them to being in a position to determine what's feasible and viable for Littleton? What do we see? What is it that we bring them? We're going to have, at least among the council, 8 or 9 different opinions.
Talk about your split personality.
Or yours.
Jim, did you have? No. Bruce?
I continue to think the concept is excellent, or very outstanding, out of the box thinking. And I'm absolutely not intending to wordsmith this thing, but the goals and objectives side of the thing, and you use the word vitality, and I think we heard that at the your District 4 thing that came up as well. But I think if you looked at the objectives here and you talked about providing an overview of economic vitality strategies, or incentives for business vitality, or collaborative economic vitality opportunities, it's a different framing of what we're trying to accomplish. I think it struck me sitting here listening to what Phil was talking about as well, that yeah, we're trying to get a takeaway from this, but I think if we look at it from the perspective of people who would participate in this as well, if we invite these types of professionals to have a seat at a table, however we can, construct the parameters of the bowling alley, ultimately, that's a unique opportunity because it's not, I don't know that it's frequent or often that a municipality or governmental entity would reach out like this to invite people to come in and have an open-ended kind of discussion. And I think obviously the takeaways for us can be fairly straightforward, but I think the folks that would participate on this from the business side of the world, it then becomes a model for them to hold up in other places they do business about how things work in a productive environment, and it can be moderately viral in that regard. I mean, if we do something strong and it has a good outcome and there's dialogue and these guys go to Community X and say, hey, we saw this happen in Littleton, it worked pretty well. Free-flowing idea kind of thing. I think that's, to me, there's a lot of nuance around what the specifics, how much fencing you do on any given issue. I think the bowling alley is it doesn't have to be a bowling alley. I mean, it can be multiple lanes wide or one lane or whatever. But yeah, there are going to be some things that clearly aren't going to work. But if it's an open-ended conversation, I think our collective opportunities, both on our side as well as the folks who would participate, via invitation from business and from the professional side of the world, might glean an awful lot of value and seeds that could come out of that who knows where they could germinate down the road. So I think it's a great idea. I think it's something that's really out of the box thinking and really has some upside potential. And worse it happens is if we do the invitation and it doesn't really do that much, then we know something too. If it turns out we didn't get much out of it, you can make the argument that we do then know more than when we went into it. Part of what we know is that we've got a pretty decent framing, we've got a pretty decent understanding of sort of what the tools are in the toolbox.
I had another thought that I'm sorry I didn't share earlier, but one of the concerns seemed to be how would we bring these people up to speed on what we can do, what we can't do, what we have done, those types of core issues that they might need to know. And I thought if we were to, in the whole keeping it simple, have an opportunity to get together with them, share some of our information, it would be a one-time meeting, and then they would have access, probably through Michael, to whatever they needed in terms of background information, the comp plan. I don't know if they want to go into those types of documents and look that deep, but if that was something that they had a couple questions on or something, they would have that resource. And then in the whole keeping it simple thing, this was originally planned that they would do a 6-month work plan and come back at the end. Maybe it's less than that. Maybe they can decide and come back and say, well, we're going to meet 4 or 5 times and put together what we need to, and it could be a 2-month thing or a 2.5 month. It doesn't need to be elongated. I kind of just picked that because it was a great cap to our Economic Development 101. But that has a flexibility too, which also then might make it more concentrated, which can be more effective. Jerry?
I don't want to be a naysayer here. I think what we have is good, but I think to say that this is a creative idea, to say that bringing in a group of advisors to suggest things that we do, we've done that before. I mean, we've done that with studies. We've done it the Broadway corridor. We've done it with the other corridor studies. We've had the Citizens Advisory Committee, we've had the BIAC Committee, we've had consultants, so I don't think this is such a necessarily a new way of thinking. What I would like to do is I would like to have what I don't want is for a group of people to come in here and recommend to the city about what we should do or how we should move forward. I would like to hear from developers and other cities around the regions as far as what are their successes, what are their less than successful projects or strategy. But one thing is for sure, that no city or developer can predict the future with accuracy. And I think if we were to use the objectives, as you called out there, the 3 bullets, I think those would be good to pass on to different speakers and say, hey, if you could perhaps come to us, a developer, other jurisdictions or whatever, with those 3 bullet points in mind. I would probably see it being more useful for us just to have speakers come in and tell us successes and less than successes than to expect some group of experts who's going to come in here and perhaps give us a plan that we may or may not agree with. I would rather just hear from the experts. We were elected. We have a great staff, a great city staff. Let's take advantage of this. Let's come up with it and do it ourselves. But I would like to bring people in, though, to hear from them, but individuals, not necessarily as a group. Again, I've been through the thing when I was in planning commission. We did that with groups. And after a while, and gosh, how long? Well, nobody was a hero. Nobody was a part of that. Well, Jim, you were. But how long did that CAC group go for? I mean, it was a good year or more. And I think one of the things, groups that we probably got the most out of in the past, and I'd be curious to hear what you think on this, Jim, was that Littleton group that used to do the retreats. And they used to kick a lot of stuff around. And some good stuff came out of those things. But those were citizens. And they did it upon themselves. They didn't take city council to put it together, but they were citizens. Do you remember what I'm talking about, or the group I'm talking about? I can't remember the name. Sorry?
Littleton Leadership?
Yes, thank you. In fact, you had mentioned that the other day, leadership retreat. But I think that's where the ideas for Littleton really come out, that we can take effect. But to bring in folks that don't necessarily know Littleton the way we all do, I just don't see it as being that effective. I think it'd be spinning the wheels, doing what we've done in the past, and expecting different results. That's it.
I guess I would argue that to do what you're saying is doing the same thing that we've done.
But I don't see this any different.
Okay, Peggy and then Bruce.
I think I have about 6 things to say, so I'll see if I can get them all in my head. Number 1, I've read all of the BIAC reports.
I'm sorry, pull your microphone towards you.
Get myself closer to it. Is that better? Up? Wherever. Now? Okay. I've read all the BIAC reports. I read them about 3 years ago, and then I read them all in the last week again. And there are a lot of things that are forecast in there that turned out in reverse directions, suggestions that took a different tact, whatever. But I thought they're all very worth reading. And I do support this, so let me say I do support this. But I suggest that if we do this, that as they're doing what they do, that everybody on council go back and read these reports, because it gives you some sense of here are these ideas or expectations, and some go in that direction, and sometimes something entirely different happens. There's a very good one in there from about 2001 or 2 on redeveloping sections of the city, various things, and how you might decide whether you want to encourage redevelopment in this place or that place or whatever, some factors in the deciding. In terms of the plan, I think bullet 2 in the goals is not so clear. I mean, to me, it provide an economic outlook that considers and propose changes, but the economic outlook could be, wow, it's all going to be great, or man, we're going to Turkey. I mean, that's an outlook. I think what we're looking for is provide suggestions, so it kind of goes with the third bullet, of how we can make our economy pop, in a nice sense of the word. What really might do some energizing. And so that goes with the strategies in number one and so forth. So in my head, that's good. And to the extent that someone is not from the city, they may come in and see things in a new way. I mean, that's one of the values of having somebody who's not really a huge part of the city, although I think we need some people in the city. And on the backside, in May, for example, presentation on the state of the general fund by the Center for Colorado's Economic Future at the University of Denver. Somebody from that center might be a good one to have on the committee. Somebody from the the CU School of Business might be good, again, because of the expertise they have with state and local issues. But they would see things a little differently. And bless their hearts, the students who, in 2007 came down and studied the Northeast neighborhood and said, here's a way to do something. Well, we can't just flatten, a 20-block or a 30-block square of the city, right? And that was a city manager that said, he challenged that we couldn't do that. But I think there is some value in having some outside look. But I also think there's value in having some people who are grounded. And if council wanted to talk to the group after it were constituted, I would think we would want them to go out and have a tour that's at least twice as long as the one that Chris took us on last month, and point out some of the challenges based on the experience that his department has had. Why this hasn't already flown and isn't already a big money-producing gem that everybody treasures and blends in and does whatever. And that after they've seen it, they can ask us questions, we can say things to them. I think there is some value in having some contact. Not that we want to be driving the bus at that point, but just getting, touching base with all that. And now I'm trying to remember what else was in my big list of 6 or 7 things. Oh, and I would think that we might need more than 7 people, maybe 9, but in my own head, I think we'd want a couple of bankers, and I'm not quite sure how you decide that, a couple of realtors, a small business rep, a big business rep, as in retail, and then some that aren't directly in business, selling things, directly to people in town, but the kind of people maybe like CenturyLink or, somebody of a different sort than a street retail stuff. And I already mentioned the DU and CU business connection there. And I think you get, again, as I'm saying, when you have somebody come in and look at something and they might say, geez, I'm surprised you guys don't have. Now, if they say big box, they're going to be in trouble, but apart from that, because of some of the experiences that we've had. But, we have some big boxes, but not certain kind of big boxes right now. But, geez, I'm surprised you don't have whatever it is. Or have you thought of whatever? And again, in this stack of things, some of what was suggested in terms of some of the so-called underproducing big shopping areas is a suggestion of converting to mixed use for some of that. But that requires some real interesting maneuvering to do that. But anyway, so I do suggest this, and I guess I could ask Chris. Chris, do you have copies of these that you can PDF and send to all the council, the various BAC reports?
We did.
You had, I mean, this is the whole stack. No,
Yep.
not all of them got sent out.
Peggy has them going back to 89.
I think there are about 20 of them, or 20, 18 or whatever, so that's what I'm saying, all of them, because that pattern is really interesting. So.
Bruce?
To answer Jerry's question, the old name was the Littleton Leadership Retreat. It's been going on since the 70s. And last week, there was a meeting of about 30 stakeholders in the community to talk about whether there would be a future. Now it's going to be the Littleton Community Retreat. And the cross of various expertises and professions in that group does really match some of the things we've talked about today. So there is a private group of citizens that want to come together and try to do the right things and find some alternatives for Littleton, and that is in the works, but that's different than what we're talking about today. That's private folks with their interests. I think what's different today is we're coming out of a recession that is significant in 50 years. And I think we have this sense of urgency that we feel. We're elected in our community here, and we believe we live in the greatest community that there is, but I think we feel threatened. And we say, you know what, we're coming out of a recession. We're looking at where money's going to go, people's going to go, people are going to go. We've just been through the toughest time of the Littleton schools where they've had to actually close them. And if you talk to them about how they're dealing with the future, quite honestly, they're staying alive by importing people from outside of our community in order to keep themselves viable. These are all very sobering, that's a great word, sobering, stoic kinds of things that we feel we are at the leadership helm when this is all coming in. So how do we proceed? And I think that's what makes it maybe a little different than in the past. Without to belabor the point, in the past it was the outcomes were continuation of doing things right, maybe finding a little different alternative. But this is a competition, and somebody brought that up in the meeting that I was in last week. We're in a competition as this community compared to other communities around us to who's going to attract the school-age kids, the families, the people that want to develop the housing, the people that would like to put businesses in retail, or as Chris mentions, the kind that are bigger than that. So we are in a competition, but we don't even know for sure, I'm speaking for myself, what the ground rules are going to be for this competition, this game that we're in for the next several years. So I really respect, Debbie, what you're trying to do here, because the way I have viewed it is, this is trying to learn what it is we don't know, as you've mentioned a couple times, to help us lead this community to what is going to be a tipping point issue for us, and here we are, the leaders at the time. And if it's not exactly as you've described it, it certainly needs the expertise of others than the people in this room and probably within the city, because again, this is so new and so different that we need the new and different ideas that transcend what our own experiences are.
Jim?
Well, I would support the formation of a advisory group, whatever you want to call it, that would help us. We've got a lot of redevelopment and development both to do in the community, and I look at it as going to be the economic future growth of the community with both residential and businesses. I will tell you, in my experiences with dealing with these types of committees at Dr. Cog, you got to do a lot of education. You can't just call a group of people together and say, here's what your goals and objectives are. We find out that we've got to educate them. We have a committee that was appointed when I was chair that had only 3 elected officials on it, and we had representatives of bankers, builders, transportation, transit, all kinds of people. There are only 12 of us total. We spent the first 3 meetings trying to just get outsiders, so to speak, who were never held elected office, never sometimes even served on a major committee, educated to the point where they knew what the goals and objectives were that we wanted to do. So I think that this won't be a fast fix. You're going to have to take some time to go through that. Also, I will tell you, I would prefer having more people on there as opposed to less. You put 11 members on there, you may get 7 that'll show up at any one meeting. And the next meeting you have, you'll have a different 8. So it kind of ebbs and flows. You can never put a group of busy people together. And when I look at this list of names that have been suggested, all of those are pretty busy people. You can't get them to clear their calendar out where they can consistently come to meetings. So having more, I think, is better than having fewer numbers. I do like moving forward with something along these lines.
Bruce?
One of the other comments that and again, I stuck my head in on toward the end of your District 4 thing, but one of the other comments that came up was, are we doing this from the standpoint of trying to figure out how to raise more revenue? And I thought your answer was quite good. Revenue is a necessity at some level because we need funds to provide services. So, for example, I think we know we've got some issues coming down the pike in terms of, for example, roads that need to be repaired, not just patched, but replaced, so forth and so on. We sat and talked last night about nutrient regulations with Englewood and the sewer plant. I mean, the fact of the matter is revenue is a consideration, but I think what we're broadly talking about here falls more in the category of council's fiduciary responsibility to the citizens and the stakeholders within the city regarding quality of life and ultimately property values, because it all, and you touched on this Saturday and also tonight, it is a full circle proposition. I mean, it's the economic vitality of the community, it's the businesses, it's the housing, it's the schools, it's how do we pay for open space maintenance over a period of time. God forbid that kind of money dry up, we've still got an obligation to maintain parks and whatnot. So all of this comes within the purveyance of our collective fiduciary responsibility to the community. So it's not just about, hey, we need more sales tax revenue so we can build a bigger whatever. And I think that's an important context to fit this within.
Jim?
One other thing, Bruce just kind of triggered that when you talked about sales tax increases. There is a constitutional amendment that is being proposed that eliminates all property tax as of January 1st, 2016. You look at eliminating property tax for this city is not, it's not a major hit. But you look at a place like Beaumar, who doesn't have a business in it at all, depends entirely on property tax. You look at South Suburban, whose property depends entirely on property tax. The impacts that's going to have on the community if that type of legislation passes as a constitutional amendment to this state. Then you get into the real competition about trying to develop all of our vacant land into something that's going to produce a sales tax and no residential because they don't pay. They're only a drain. And so that needs to be looked at, and an outside group may be able to say, here's what we think you need to do.
Well, it was interesting when I was speaking to someone who does work in this business about what developers or businesses or banks or anyone is looking for when they are looking at taking the risk, because that is what is happening. They are taking a risk when they decide to do something in a community. And there's so many factors that weigh into that. If they want to put residential, then what are those things that would feed into that residential? What are the things that would be amenities outside, for that residential? If they're going to build commercial, or they're going to put in retail, how many rooftops? We have challenges in our community with South Platte Park because it provides no rooftops, and it's a huge piece of land, and we have undeveloped spaces. And just getting information in from people, and I appreciate, Jerry, what you're saying about the citizen stuff, but the citizens come from a completely different bent and a completely different angle on this, and I think it's valuable. I think it's good information. I would not have a single problem with perhaps having a nice, large public open house where we hear from the citizens and we get a lot of that feedback and information. But the information coming from the group we would look at for the think tank is industry insider stuff. It's stuff that if you were going to open up a business somewhere, a neighbor's going to open up an optical business, and so he has been speaking to other obstetricians, other people who are small businesses, other people, small business loans, those types of things that will help give him the information he needs to make the decisions he needs to make about his business. They're not telling him how to run it. They're not telling him what to do. They're giving him education. So there's layers. We've got 6 months, and we can go longer than that, of learning to do, and this is one of those classes, not to the exclusion of more inclusion of the community too.
Yeah. So I think to some extent in my notes that I've taken so far, there's two kind of core questions that you guys have been struggling with, which is how to gain the information. Do you have it through a task force, think tank, whatever terminology you use, or do you invite them into the room and have them make that discussion here? But one of the things, and I think Councilman Beckman hit it home for me, is the one piece in the goals and objectives that you might want to think about, because it sounds like generally there's support for this, is, the way I wrote it down was, what's the new world order in economic development? What are the new rules and challenges that the private sector faces? And for them to educate that, you all on that, all of us on that. So we understand from the bankers, what are the new rules that they're dealing with? And so if we understand, the collective, we understand what the challenges are for the private sector, then you all can develop, potentially, policies and directives that address that to minimize the challenges within your purview of a business locating here, expanding here, relocating here, that type of thing. And so I didn't really see that in the goals and objectives, and I didn't think about it until the councilman mentioned it, but it's really to hear from them it's not just to talk to you all, right, about strategies and what you should be doing. It's them to tell you what are their challenges so that you can develop appropriate strategies and challenges. And that might change a little bit because, Jerry, that was what I heard the concerns. You don't need another group coming and telling you what you should do. But if you get educated on what that private sector, in whatever cross-section of membership you create, having come and tell you, these are the challenges I have when I develop anywhere. It's not Littleton specific because you all are the policymakers. You will decide whether that particular piece is appropriate to address.
Condo versus apartment.
Yeah, there are issues that you will put the political overlay on that you do not need them to take that role, because as I think, Jerry, you mentioned, you guys are elected. You guys, that's your task, is to deal with the political ramifications, not necessarily have any subgroup say, here's what you should do. So anyway, long-winded, but I think if you tie that into the goals, if that's what you end up doing, to have them talk to you about what their challenges are and what the new rules of this post-recession are.
So in terms of that, if they talk about their challenges where they develop, they may also then say, this worked better because. Yep. So then we see that piece of it too,
Certainly.
right?
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
guys can pose questions on it related to, in whatever fashion you want, to better understand that and understand how you may have change our local laws, policies, whatever, to, again, minimize those. Or keep them in place if that's your intent.
And there's, I'm coalescing around, there's at least 3 questions that we have. One is, what are some of the ideas that exist out there around economic development?
Are you working on goals now?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, in the whole, as I see it, one is, and what we want is we want ideas, I'll say from beyond the borders at this point in time, but that doesn't mean that they don't germinate here. But to get to that point, the question that Michael just raised, which is, what are the new rules and order for folks looking for opportunity, okay, whether it's an existing business or it's a new business relocating, how has that changed, and what are the challenges and the key points that a business and or a family would be looking at? That's a question. Second question is that you have down there in the second bullet point, and I'm going to kind of restate it, which is, what's the trajectory that Littleton has and where we're going? Phyllis Resnick from DU has kind of made that picture for the state, and it says based on revenue and infrastructure and all of that, it's, to use the word that Bruce used earlier, sobering for the state. Well, Littleton has a direct trajectory, and we're not out there putting big reserves around capital. So there's some things, and that really is almost another question to say, hey, how does that work? And then the third is, okay, now that we have these ideas as to what folks are looking at as a challenge to relocate or redevelop or reinvest or be present in the community, we understand what our trajectory is. Then the third part is how do we make that viable? And there's some constraints on what is even possible, okay? Because there's going to be some things that we may be willing to stretch the character of the community, but there's some things that a municipality has at its disposal that is different than what the state would do or the feds would do. And then we'd have to figure out what are we going to do. And so, I'm almost at the point where it's, yes, we can bring in folks to kind of think about some of this, but at some point in time, we have to get our collective understanding and language at a point where we can really grapple enough with those issues. And I might suggest that, hey, give it to Chris and Glenn and Michael and say, hey, those are the 4 pieces of the question that we really need to answer. Come back with something, and some of it may be, yeah, we do have a committee that grapples with some of that and brings it back and gives us some level of education, but some of this is things that getting bankers and developers together isn't going to tell us what the city finances are and our requirements. And that group of folks may do a great job of explaining some things, but they're not grappling with what is it that a municipality can or can't do in some of this context. And then we have to put the political frame and saying, what are we willing to do to stretch the community's character?
And I think you're hitting on some key points, and it's gathering those morsels of information from these different resources that will help us build whatever economic plan we want to build or not build. But it's one piece at a time, and each person that you bring into a collaborative area and work with and hear from and share with all contribute to that. And that's what we don't have, and that's what this would essentially help build.
And I guess my only piece is how far does that get away, and how much that is a group effort on their part with that diverse set, and that's the dynamic I don't have, because I guess given some prior experience putting leopards and lions and tigers in the same cage doesn't necessarily get you something other than the survival of the dominant one. And I think we're looking more to understand and have some appreciation for the ingredients. I'll put it in rather than a word, because absent that we're going to have a hard time grappling with it. And so I think we need a little bit more. I'm leaning towards more of something that says yes, and to keep it innovative, new, and outside the walls pieces, not to put that much constraint. I understand some of that, but we're also asking them to not come in with some things that only the feds or the state could do, because we're only empowered as a home rule city.
Jerry?
I too have read the business plans over the years. I've had them too. I'm thinking, though, that this think tank is going to be more or less of almost a BAC report. It's not going to be that different. It's going to come in and tell us what some things that should happen, what are the goals, and what are the hurdles. I've written dozens and dozens of business plans, and I know some of you here have written business plans too. I feel as though we don't have a business plan here. We're going out and reaching for pieces, but we're not putting it together. I think a think tank, something, whatever we want to call it, that's what we're calling it for now, it is just one of the spokes in a wheel. And I think putting all of our weight into this think tank as though they're going to come up with our strengths and weaknesses and give us a magic bullet, I don't feel that's the way we should go. I would rather have it as a piece. That's why I would like folks to come in and tell us what are their forecasts, and then we come in and make the decision. I think if we bring in a group of folks and ask them to go through the exercise of coming up with a plan, and then we don't carry it out, I just don't like the feel of that. I think you said a few weeks ago, give them a certificate and thank you. I would like it just to be a part of the information that we're fed, that we end up making a decision on, just as we use Chris. He gives us information. We use that just to make decisions. We don't necessarily go a certain direction, but we use that information. That's what I would like to see, is just have somebody come in and talk, many come in and talk to us.
Well, I'm going to throw out a couple suggestions to help move us along. I would suggest that we've pretty well defined, I think, the general industries. We've got an extensive list of names. I would ask that Michael work with the appropriate members on staff to contact at least 3 of those key industry players, Jessica, Banker, that give them a encapsulated version of what we're discussing here, get some of their feedback as to if they're saying, oh, geez, we don't want to work together on that, or they may have some ways that they feel we might get more from them. So why don't we float that balloon around with them, if you can bring back some information on that. And then also, Michael, work based on what we've heard tonight from particularly Phil and Jerry and Bruce and Peggy, on the goals and objectives, if we can fine-tune some of those to put in some of the intents that I think we all have on that, and we can even add 1 or 2, but to get that so that we all feel more comfortable. And then, and I'm happy to work with you on this too, to also put together, I think, a rollout that would give us a little bit better idea of what kind of timing we're looking at on this and what kind of commitment we might be expecting from them, but to give sort of a project schedule so that we have an idea of what kind of commitment and what are the layers that are going into this, and not just helter-skelter. That's going to give us a better basis for making the decisions we need to make. So if we can have that by next study session, okay.
Most
Bill?
certainly.
And knowing that some of the resources may not be totally volunteers, do we have a top-end budget number in mind?
Well, my thought was that the only non-volunteer would perhaps be a facilitator, if in fact that's what we needed to do. But other than that, they would just volunteer for this. I would rather not have someone insist on being paid. We can move to the next name on the list, and if everybody's okay with that.
I just know if I was sitting in Michael's seat, I'd want to know, because there are potential resources that are not local too, so.
Well, they may need some funding to produce documents, they may need some resources, although hopefully not a whole lot.
Well, yeah.
If it's incidentals,
Yeah.
We have the
obviously,
printing
we
and
can.
Xeroxing.
Yeah, I mean, we do that
We have
in-house.
our own print.
Place to
That's-
meet.
That part.
Yeah, and we can offer this as a free meeting space. Peggy?
And I do want to comment about what Jerry said. I don't see this myself, Jerry, at least I hope not, coming and telling us what to do. The way I see this, it's a little different from the BAC reports, is this is going to give us more insights into some hows, not the what so much, but also the hows, the mechanisms. And you may remember, I said a few weeks ago when we talked about this, that I think council needs to be doing an awful lot of the thinking, just as you're saying. But I see this as a tool for us, not something that's telling us what to do.
It's not the final answer.
And Mayor, I think one of the other things that we can do that could help clarify is, one, we probably won't call it Economic Development 101, but we'll come up with a nicer name for it. But really, and Jerry, this is really to your question and to Peggy's just last comment is try to tie in the intent of getting you all educated on, all of us educated on what other communities have done, what is allowable to Phil's comment earlier, what is allowable in the state of Colorado, to make sure, because Phil might have one level of knowledge and understanding, and that could be different from Bruce, make sure that everyone is on that same playing field, you have the same terminology, and you understand that. But ultimately, how this information gathering ties in with what the conversation you guys had tonight, and how it will dovetail, and ultimately, you have the hows out there, and you guys will decide the whats. So we'll try to tie that in better so that you guys can see how those puzzle pieces fit together.
And I like the concept of task force myself, rather than people getting tanked. So,
Or thinking they're getting...
We were going to meet at the bar. I was
anyway.
all over that. So I'm sorry, task force?
Yeah, I think that suggests the kind of rigor and scope.
Another term could be a
Panel?
Okay, throw all these names in the hopper. Okay, anything else?
Let's put a committee together to figure out what the name is.
We have a dartboard in my office.
That is an art.
Make a motion.
Jeez.
Jerry,
And,
make a motion.
Yeah,
We can't do that here.
can't do that. Don't forget, next Tuesday, we meet at 6:30.
Hey, Jerry, don't forget that.
Meet at 5:30.
What?
No, we
6:30?
don't.
6:30.
Oh, wait, is that the 30th? Yes.
Yeah, 6:30.
No,
Are we
5:30.
meeting at 6:30?
We have an executive session. Is that for the May 1st meeting?
Yeah.
We have an executive session at 5:30 with Julie Anderson, Judge Julie Anderson.
Well, if we're doing,
That's the May meeting.
May
Yeah,
1st.
May 1st.
Okay, so
we can't,
So
there's
when
a
are we
video
doing the
then.
filming? Because we were told we were going to do the filming at 6:30.
6:30.
Well, I imagine you'll be out of I think that's why we did it at 5:30, because you'll be out of the executive session by then.
I don't know how long.
We will check with Kelly, who's coordinating that.
Yeah, if she could.
Let me know, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Good evening.